until we see a PowerPoint presentation that has been put together by a very dear friend of mine that I met in Jackson, Miss Rita Anderson. Kind of got involved with Common Core last year when her granddaughter at Northwest Rankin High School had to read one of the books on the exemplary reading list from Common Core called The Bluest Eye. And most of you in here have already heard that The Bluest Eye is a very graphic book that details a lot of explicit sexual content and profanity that I would never, as a teacher, put in front of my classroom of 10th, 11th graders or anybody. And Rita began to do some intensive research when her radar went up, and we both began to be contacted by people in the community, and that's just kind of how this thing evolved. It really wasn't anything that we planned. It was just something that we were brought together for a common cause, and it's worked out very, very well that we are able to lean on each other and help each other and put our research together. And you will find this PowerPoint very, very educational and enlightening to learn how Common Core began and how we got from point A to point B. And then we will wrap up and I will discuss some of the things in her PowerPoint, and then we'll give you an opportunity to ask a few questions. So I would like to introduce my good friend from Clinton, Mississippi, former twice president of the Chamber of Commerce, retired from, I believe, the communications industry. Is that correct? Miss Rita Anderson.
I appreciate that. As Angela said, I'm from Clinton, Mississippi. And I want to tell you, I'm very proud of my school system in Clinton. As you know, they're one of the A-rated school systems. Yes, I have talked to school board members. I've talked to superintendent, assistant superintendent. I have a dear friend who's the principal of Northside Elementary, that is second and third grade, and they were in the news last year because the First Lady came there and visited with Rachel Ray, whoever that is. I don't do that TV. Anyway, so she's really proud of her school. She's got a shiny new facility with a lot of technology. She is a sister in Christ because we go to church together. And she invited me over to see what happens in the third grade at Clinton's Northside Elementary School. And you know, I came away from there really, really proud of what she's doing. They've developed their own curriculum, by the way. They're not downloading anything from anywhere, she said, and I saw it. I asked her about textbooks, and she said, we don't buy any textbooks. I think textbooks are a racket. We just don't do that. We develop our own curriculum. That made me feel really good. But she still defends the Common Core initiative, and we differed on a few things. So I love her. We just agreed to disagree. But I give you that as a little background because I believe that, like those folks in Clinton where I live, education officials all around the state care about the same things that we care about. They just came at Common Core from a different direction at a different time, and they were listening to different voices than you and I are hearing. And so hopefully we can find a common place to solve this problem at some point. You see, I call this the Common Core Initiative because despite the fact that so many people tell me, well, it's just about standards, don't worry about it. You know, you got local control of curriculum like they do in Clinton. But the initiative is about so much more than standards. In my job, I want to kind of describe to you the framework, the fundamentals, what all the moving parts really are. And I call myself the setup person for Senator Hill. So let's get started and set up the issue of Common Core. And I'm probably talking to the choir. You're a well-informed group, but you know it's a set of K through 12 educational standards. Math and English language arts standards were rolled out in 2010. Next generation science standards are the Common Core science standards. They just didn't adopt the Common Core name for them. And they came out in the spring of this year. How do we get Common Core standards and all that went with it? As Angela said, we got in the 2009 stimulus bill when the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act appropriated $4.35 billion for education. And Secretary Duncan and the department said, we're going to put that in a race to the top federal grant fund. And states can compete for this grant money. And you remember 2009 was really worse economically than it is today. States were really strapped for cash. It was a race for the money. Plus, the other carrot was you'll have a better chance at No Child Left Behind waivers if you apply for this grant. Okay, if you apply for the grant, just apply for the grant. Never mind if you got any grant funds. You were committing your state to certain things. You were committing them to standards and assessments, which would be aligned one to the other, to develop and adopt a common set of national standards that were college and career ready. Just so happens that what was available at the time was the Common Core standards. So that was the place to go. The government knew they were driving school districts to that one set of standards. States would agree to develop and adopt high-quality assessments that are aligned to the standards. They would agree to participate in a consortium for testing. Mississippi is in the PARC consortium, the Partnership for the Assessment of Readiness for College and Career. It started out with 25 states in that consortium. The last time I found research a couple of weeks ago, it was down to 14 states and the District of Columbia. So a number of states have dropped out. Mississippi has not. We're still in it. Another thing is that the performance evaluations for teachers and principals are tied to student growth and performance of your school under those standards. I think that's a very important point for people to realize. Okay, where did Common Core come from? It came from Achieve Incorporated, which is an entity of the National Governors Association, and that's where they get the theme of state-led, that the National Governors Association led it. The fact is that is a DC-based trade organization. All the states are not members of the NGA. A number of states have refused to participate. They don't pay any dues. They don't go to meetings. But in fact, the NGA, and they even say this on the website, we consider that every state is automatically a member, whether they want to be or not. False advertising in my book, okay? The other entity participating is the Council of Chief State School Officers, and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation put $2.2 million of initial funding into Achieve to develop a benchmarking project. And so Achieve worked on this project, and they came up with a product called Benchmarking for Success. Basically, it said, here's our action steps, or our vision, that states would upgrade their standards by adopting a Common Core of internationally benchmarked standards for K through 12. We need to leverage states' collective influence to ensure that textbooks, curricula, media assessments are aligned. It's okay, curricula's supposed to be local, right? But way up there in DC, there is an initiative that says, we want to ensure that curricula is aligned with everything else. They want to revise state policies for recruiting, preparing, developing, and supporting teachers and school leaders to reflect human capital practices. I bold that because in months of research and reading, the term human capital is one that I come across very frequently. And it's been used for a long time by reformers in education. And I resent the term as a Christian, particularly, because I believe that my children and grandchildren are created by God in His image. They are gifted by Him uniquely for His purpose, and they're not part of a human capital system. The other thing that is an action step in that document is that schools and their systems would be held accountable for all of this through monitoring, interventions, and support. I can only imagine who's going to monitor and intervene to make sure that school systems are doing all these things. And they would also measure state-level education performance globally. Okay, Achieve liked this vision so well that they decided they'd answer their own call. We produced it, we're going to do it. So they held a Governor's Education Forum in December 2008. That seems to be the first time that governors really were exposed to all this. The next year, they developed a standards development team, or 2 teams, and a validation committee. This is a little rabbit. My pastor always says, Chris, that if he flushes a rabbit, sometimes he has to chase it. This is a very important one because education reform packages, vision documents, plans, projects, none of those things are created in a vacuum. They originate from somebody's idea, somebody's ideology, what somebody has learned, their ideas and their motivations. And so it's important to know who are the people behind these initiatives. Does their value system match up with mine? Do their philosophies about education match up with mine? So this is a man that you may not have heard of. Louis Gerstner is Chairman Emeritus of IBM. On his resume, he is on boards of all the big companies, the RJR Nabiscos and all the biggies. So he's very well known in the business world. He co-chaired Achieve Incorporated in its early stages, 96 to 2002. Mr. Gerstner, there's an article where he spoke, published in the Wall Street Journal, December 2008, in which he made some recommendations to President Obama of things that he needed to do. Abolish all school districts. Save 70 districts, 1 for each of the 50 states, and then 20 for the 20 largest cities. Next, establish a set of national standards for core curriculum. Establish a National Skills Day, when every 3rd, 6th, 9th, and 12th grader would be tested against national standards. Establish national standards for teacher certification and require reevaluation of skills, and extend the school day and the school year to add 20 more days for K through 12 education. Louis Gerstner and I don't think have the same ideology. Okay, where's the heartburn with Common Core? First off, it's been promoted repeatedly as state-led. As I've just said, the NGA has no legislative authority. They don't represent every state. Nobody's empowered them to speak on behalf of our state and the voters of the state. It's being called voluntary. When the Department of Education dangles millions of dollars in front of school districts and says, come and get it, but play by our rules. And oh, by the way, we'll give you some grace over No Child Left Behind. That to me is bribery and coercion more than it is voluntary. It is pressure. It is not driven by K through 12 educators. I feel like I'm talking to a very well-informed group that you know all these things because I know you've done research. But in case you haven't, there were 29 people on those development teams that I mentioned before. Only 2 of those 29 people had no association with some kind of an education company. And by that I mean some entity that stood to profit in some way from an education reform movement. In fact, the chief architect of the English Language Arts Standards, David Coleman, probably heard of him. He's not an educator. His education is in classical literature and those kinds of things. When he finished his doctorate, he applied for a job with New York Public Schools, and he was turned down for the job, so he went to work for an education consulting firm. And his mom was the president of a college in Vermont. So those are the kinds of things, I guess, that qualify him as an educator. But he led the development of the English Language Arts Standards. Okay, the standards have not been tested. As you know, they were rolled out in draft form in March 2010, published in their final form in June 2010. Most states adopted them either early in 2010 or like Mississippi in June of 2010. There's no empirical evidence to prove that they actually work. They've not been tested. The districts have no power to change these standards. The copyrights are owned by the NGA and the CCSSO. If there's something in these standards that you don't like, you go to your principal, he can do nothing. Your administrator, your superintendent can do nothing. The state superintendent can do nothing. They're owned at the national level. And they cannot be changed. They have to be implemented 100%. Districts can add up to 15% of content. But since they're aligned with assessments, I'm sure they're not going to be tested on that 15%. And they're really not valid. There is much testimony by the people in the feedback groups that gave feedback to the drafting process that said, we don't know where our comments went. We made comments, but we really don't see a lot of evidence that anybody took them into consideration. And as you probably have read, there are a number of people, 5 in fact, on the validation committee who would not validate the standards. They would not sign off on them. A couple of them have testified that they felt that the validation letter they were sent, that the development team expected them just to put a rubber stamp and say it's fine, and they would not do that. In fact, some have testified that the process through which they developed it looked like, why did you get 29 people together? There's only 2 or 3 of you who are actually running this. That's called the Delphi method. You make it look like that it is a really objective process, and you bring all the stakeholders together with various background and various education, and you say, okay, let's tackle this project, but the facilitators actually know what the end is going to be, and they run the thing to get to their desired end. So there's some testimony by people who are on the team saying that's exactly what it felt like. So we flushed another rabbit because Mark Tucker was on the feedback group. Mark Tucker is a very interesting character. How many of you ever heard of him? Just a few. Okay. He came to Mississippi in September of 2011, and he spoke to the Commission for Teacher Accreditation and Certification for the State Board of Education. And you read the minutes, and he's recorded as being an educator and an author. Well, Mark Tucker is educated in drama, classical literature, theater production. I think his doctorate is in telecommunications policy. Now, I read in my research that he actually taught 2 semesters in junior college, which is his sum total of teaching experience. He apparently didn't pursue education in his own education as a profession, but he's being touted as an educator. The man who was the Teacher of the Year in California in 2007 looks at the fact that there's just no education people in this whole process and says, I have a problem with that. It's like trying to learn how to cook from somebody that has never been in a kitchen. Okay, but what I want you to really know about Mark Tucker is his ideology. Because as I've said, these things aren't created in a vacuum. They come from somebody's ideology, and his is really scary. Mark Tucker is famous for his Dear Hillary letter. He actually helped Bill Clinton when he was governor of Arkansas to work on some education things in Arkansas. So he had a relationship with the Clintons when Bill got elected president. And he sent First Lady of Arkansas, Hillary Clinton, an 18-page letter. The Dear Hillary letter has been entered into the congressional record. It's easy to find on the internet if you want to go read that letter sometime. But basically what it says is, he presented to her a system that lays out a plan to, quote, remold the entire American system into a seamless web that literally extends from cradle to grave, is the same system for everyone, coordinated by a system of labor market boards at the local, state, and federal levels, where curriculum and job matching will be handled by counselors accessing the integrated computer-based program. His ambitious plan was implemented in 3 laws passed by Congress and signed by President Clinton in 1994. Golds 2000, School to Work Act, Elementary and Secondary Education Act, the reauthorized. And there are 3 things that were established mechanisms in what he did. First, bypass all elected officials on school boards and in state legislatures by making federal funds flow to the governor and his appointees on workforce development boards. Second, use a computer base, also known as a labor market information system, into which school personnel would scan all information about every school child and his family, identified by child's social security number, academic, medical, mental, psychological, behavioral, interrogations by counselors. The computerized data would be available to the school, the government, and future employers. Does that sound familiar to y'all? Okay, this was in the early 90s. Thirdly, use national standards and national testing to cement national control of tests, assessments, school honors and rewards, financial aid, and the Certificate of Initial Mastery, which is designed to replace the high school diploma. There's a great article about this, about him. I made a few copies back there. If anybody wants one for a take-home, you're welcome to have it. But there's Mark Tucker's ideology, and I will tell you that along with David Coleman, he is considered to be one of the primary architects of the Common Core Initiative. What did states do when the race to the top was announced? 45 states initially adopted it because governors, thank you, Rob. Governors recommended it. They were under economic pressure. They didn't have any time to evaluate what they were doing. There were 5 states that refused to do it. One of them was Texas. You don't mess with Texas. Rick Perry said it would be foolish and irresponsible to place our children's future in the hands of unelected bureaucrats and special interest groups thousands of miles away in Washington, virtually eliminating parents' participation in their children's education. I think he was absolutely right. There are about 20 states right now that are in various stages of pulling back from the Common Core Initiative. Who's invested in it? Well, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, there is no doubt about it. From the beginning of Achieve until now, they have continually put money in education reform to the point where it's approaching $500 million. That is big bucks. The states are invested in it, but how much, we're really not sure, because most states have not done any financial assessments. Accountability Works did an assessment several years ago when it first came out, estimating that nationwide across all states, that all of the resources, testing, curriculum, all the things states would have to do to gear up for this initiative would reach about $16 billion. Wisconsin this summer their legislature had a commission to do a fiscal assessment for their state. They reported back to the legislature in September last month, said somewhere between $62 and $256 million. That's a big gap. Wisconsin really doesn't know what they're in for. And I haven't seen any evidence, and Senator Hill maybe can speak to this better, but I don't think she's seen any evidence that Mississippi has done any financial assessments to really know what it might cost us going forward. There's a big investment by you as parents, by our children, our educators, and local districts. A big investment because it's our children and it's our future. There's just some of the entities that have gotten money from Gates. As you notice, NGA got over $25 million. The Council of Chief State School Officers and Teachers Unions, I will tell you, they have gotten a lot of money. You see CCSSO got $107 million. And almost without question, and all of these grant things are public record. It is not hard to find them. Almost without question, the grant stipulation is this money is to help implement, promote Common Core in the states. That is the agenda. Student Achievement Partners is a company formed by David Coleman. The only project it's ever worked on is Common Core. National Education Association got money, as you can see. Lots of colleges and universities have gotten money to help promote and implement Common Core. This is my friend Rob Chambers with the Christian Action Commission. He and I met several months ago with a pastor and his wife, who's a teacher in the Cleveland Public School Districts, and she was trying to decide exactly where she came down on Common Core. And she kind of liked some things that were kind of positive, and she wanted to talk about it. And I really wasn't sure where she fell down and if she's even decided. But she had just come back from doing some graduate work at Arkansas State University. She wants to be a curriculum counselor. And I'm thinking, how much is that university influencing these teachers and these potential curriculum counselors? Because here's a pastor's wife, and I felt like this pastor was concerned. But his wife's sitting over here as an educator saying, well, no, I see some things I kind of like. Not healthy. Okay, we talked about how much for the states. Let me just tell you, it is about curriculum. Yeah, curriculum is supposed to be the job of the local school boards, but not everybody is like Clinton. And I will tell you, the assistant superintendent and my principal friend both said, we've had districts, we even had the MDE come in here and look at what we're doing and say, how can we get a copy of your curriculum? Now they're going, well, it's ours, it's not for sale, it's not marketable. Well, they have the luxury of putting groups, task forces of teachers together that they feel are qualified to develop that curriculum. That's how they did it. And they were paid a stipend over the summer to do it. Not all districts can do that. And so where are they going to go get it? They're going to go get it at the Worldwide Net. And there are plenty of educational resource companies out there marketing that stuff. And that's why we're seeing so much of it this year. Because now we're really deep into having to implement these things, and the curriculum developers have caught up to it. When it was rolled out in 2010, they didn't have time to react. They had materials already on the market, and they just started stamping Common Core on it. But now, 3 years later, they've had time to react and modify their materials, and now it's looking more, you're seeing this year what looks more like what Common Core really is. It de-emphasizes classical literature, as we all know. In the upper grades, it's calling for at least 50%, sometimes 70% of informational text, which could be government documents and technical bulletins and executive orders. Perish the thought. Okay. Pearson Publishing. You could spend weeks just researching Pearson Publishing. You're an international company. 60% of their market is in North America. And they have very well-known labels like Prentice Hall and Scott Forsman. They do it. Thing is, they partnered with Gates on the standards. There were people on the standards development team with America's Choice, which is an entity that was created by the National Center for Education and the Economy, which, by the way, Mark Tucker is the president of. And they created it as a nonprofit, took it as a profit, and sold it to Pearson. So people who work for America's Choice, i.e. Pearson, were on the standards development team. So Pearson has a role in that. They're also the big curriculum people. They also have a bunch of contracts with the PARCC assessments. There's something wrong with a single entity having so much influence on all the pieces of the puzzle to me. Now, yes, they've been investigated for antitrust and things like that. It's about age-appropriate learning. Early childhood education, people say it's not appropriate for young children. The Alliance for Early Childhood in 2010, in March 2010, when the drafts came out, there were 117 early childhood educators, child psychologists, and ministers who all signed a document saying, this is not good for young children. It is too stressful. It is not good. Okay. Assessments and data, these are the other parts of the Race to the Top requirements that we signed on for. We're in the PARCC Consortium. Department of Education gave them $170 million in funding to get up and going. The Brookings Institute has estimated that it could cost Mississippi $29.50 per student for these PARCC testing instruments. Right now, testing costs about $14 a student. And then, of course, the statewide longitudinal data systems, which is, quote, unquote, the data mining. We do have one in Mississippi. I have a friend who was on a Cub Scout trip this weekend with a guy who works for MDE who said, well, we're only doing 90 points of data in Mississippi. You know, that's all we're going to do. Now, Bill Gates' big program that he has is like 400 points of data, and it's really invasive stuff. But our statewide guy says that's all we're going to do. Here's my problem. I'm fine with the people in Clinton in the way they develop curriculum. I applaud you for that. There are a lot of things to applaud, but you know what? The camel's nose is under the tent. And if we're not careful, he's going to have his whole body under there. And 90 points of data to me is the nose and the head and part of the neck. Where does it end? We got to stop it before it. Bill Gates, the man. You want to talk about ideology? Okay, you probably know that Bill Gates signed on and initialed every page of a cooperation agreement with UNESCO, the United Nations Education, Social, Cultural Organization. Microsoft supports the objectives of UNESCO as stipulated in UNESCO's Constitution. The agreement states that the syllabus will, quote, form the basis for deriving training content to be delivered to teachers. And UNESCO, United Nations, will explore how to facilitate content development. That's an international partnership. It's the step toward global education and global control of education in America. So we look at some of the things that are being taught, like the Second Amendment being misquoted and the, you know, what could we do away with in the Bill of Rights if you were on that team. We read all those things, but the truth is, we're losing our American heritage in more ways than you can imagine. I asked my friend at Northside, are you teaching cursive writing? Yes, we do. We teach it as a part of art because parents expect it. I said, well, I'm glad you're teaching it. I think you ought to teach it because if kids can't read cursive writing, they cannot read the founding documents. And have all of you heard David Barton's testimony, Wall Builders, about that? Anybody heard it? It's wonderful. He said that when he was in college, he took a course on the Constitution. His instructor said some things that did not sit well in his spirit. And he said, I want to know for myself what the Constitution says. So he went and got a copy of the original document because he can read and write in cursive. He could read that old English script. And he looked and he said, that is not what it says. So he could challenge his professor. I want my grandchildren to be able to do that. I told Sally, I have wills from the 1700s of my forefathers from Virginia and South Carolina. I want my grandchildren to be able to read those handwritten wills. It's also illegal, this initiative. The Education Provision Act prohibits the Department of Education from exercising control over education. They've got their fingers all in it. FERPA says parents must give consent to release student data. But Secretary Duncan has written a regulation saying, well, we don't have to get parents' consent if it's for legitimate educational purposes and if these 47 jillion entities need it because they have legitimate educational purposes. So that's a federal law that someone has decided to amend by their regulation. Is there a refuge from the Common Core? David Coleman is now president of the College Board. They are aligning the SAT test to the Common Core. ACT is already being aligned. The company that owns the GED, I think Pearson is a partner in that company. Surprise, surprise. And so when it's released, it's going to be aligned to the Common Core. And a number of parochial schools are already being aligned. So, you know, it's hard to find an escape. It's not just in public school that it's going to be a problem. Do we really have local control of education? It's time to really question that. And if we're going to have it, it's going to be because we insist on it. Can you opt out of this? And I found this website just a couple of weeks ago, and I haven't studied it in depth, but I thought you might want to be aware of it in case you want to go study it. UnitedOptOut.com, and you can click on a link to your state, and they give you some good information about testing and what's done in the various states, perhaps avenues to opt out if you want to try and take that avenue. What do? First and foremost, we pray, because we are not battling against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers in high places. And the Lord said the battle is His. So we're in it every day, and we fight it on our knees. You educate yourself, and you engage policymakers. And you need to do that, because when you engage those elected officials, you need to have your data. It's not enough to say this is bad, it's unconstitutional. You need to tell them why. You need to be specific. Pay attention to what your child brings home. Yes, my granddaughter read The Bluest Eye last year as an 11th grader at Northwest Rankin. It was one of 3 books that her teacher said, choose one of these and read it, your assignment. My daughter had no clue. They said, okay, where can we get these books? Oh, we can get The Bluest Eye here. That looks okay. We'll read it. When she started reading it, of course, and my daughter was looking at it, and she said, this is horrendous. They had to have a talk. I wanted her to say, I went down to the school district. I went down to the principal's office. I told them what I objected to, but she didn't. And I'm sorry, but I re-educated her, by the way. So that is exactly what you need to do. But that's the thing. Yes, local districts control curriculum, but you know, they're under a lot of pressure. They are under a lot of pressure. They're going to be evaluated on all this stuff, and they're expected to do it. So if they go to a website and The Bluest Eye is on those suggested resources, those text exemplars, I guess that's the easy route. Unfortunately, we got to be watchdogs. Attend meetings like this and stay informed and talk to your elected officials. There are a number of great conservative organizations that are in the fight with us on this, and I am so thankful for that, and that's just a few of them. Sally and I know about Eagle Forum because we're in it. Phyllis Shafley is a great pro-life proponent. What do we need to do in Mississippi? I'm going to leave that for Angela because there's a number of things we can do, and she's the legislator, she's on top of that. So that's my setup. That's the fundamentals, and thank you so much for being such a great audience.
I can probably just go on home. I do want to elaborate on some of the things that Rita brought out in the PowerPoint. And when I talk to local education officials and when they send out memos to their teachers and when educators in Mississippi talk to the media, I was told by one of the reporters that the Department of Education clearly said that grants were not involved in the adoption of Common Core, and that was not how we got there. So I have made a bunch of copies of the June 25th, 2010 board minutes for the State Department of Education, and I will leave those on the back in case you would like a copy. I didn't make enough for everybody, but in case you want a copy of those board minutes, I did make those. And I'd like to read to you how the Common Core standards were adopted and why. On a motion by Dr. O. Wayne Gann, seconded by Mr. Claude Hartley, the board voted unanimously to adopt the Common Core state standards for mathematics as a temporary rule to become effective immediately based on finding of imminent peril to public welfare and the loss of substantial federal funds from Race to the Top grant, and that the board begin the APA process to adopt Common Core state standards for mathematics. And the next line, number 10, says the same thing based on adoption of the English Language Arts standards. So it's very clear in the board minutes that the impetus to adopt Common Core standards was the Race to the Top money. And the board has also said that you did not have to adopt Common Core in the Race to the Top, but you could not get all the points in the grant. You couldn't get the substantial amount of points unless you did adopt Common Core. So in order to compete for the grant competitively, you had to adopt Common Core, and you had to set up a statewide longitudinal data system. That was the biggest two things that were required for competition and race to the top during the 2009 stimulus. And you know, all of you have heard some of our current leaders in Washington, D.C. say never let a good crisis go to waste. Well, the federal government certainly took advantage of this economic crisis in 2009 with putting federal money out there to try to get states to sign on to do what they wanted to do and nationalize our curriculum. It is very evident by what's going on in Washington, D.C. that the national standards and the testing consortium funded by the federal government is only the tip of the iceberg in how far the federal government and the Department of Education wants to go to take total control over education in the states. Most of you have been kind of distracted because of the Obamacare and the government shutdown that's going on, but there is a battle going on regarding this very topic in the Congress in Washington, D.C. There is a bill that has been voted out of the Senate Education Committee that was authored by Senator Tom Harkins called the Strengthening America's Schools Act. That bill basically gave Arne Duncan the walking papers to be the National Superintendent of Education, and it basically set the federal government up to be more or less a national school board in that bill. And you have opposition on both sides of the political aisle. If any of you have read Diane Ravitch's blog, she initially supported national standards, but she has seen the kind of shady way this thing has been brought in and implemented, and she has even questioned the federal government's role in education. And we're on a very, very slippery slope here whenever we have a bill that is out there in your face in the Senate in the United States that would basically ignore the Constitution and ignore the 3 federal laws that says the Department of Education cannot have any direction, any real effect on a state's standards, curriculum, or testing. And they've already violated that through using third-party proxies to do their work, and they funded these third-party proxies to be one step removed so that it wouldn't look like the federal government was actually doing it. But if you believe that the curriculum won't be dictated by the test items, then you better think again. Because we all know our kids have been taking MCT2 in Mississippi, and we know that we've had textbooks that were written specifically for Mississippi Algebra 1, MCT2. So the curriculum will certainly be developed and is being developed by the testing consortiums and these partners with Pearson. So we've even gotten so far as having a federal review process. Common Core assessment groups to undergo new federal review process. So there's already been created a panel of 7 by the Department of Education who will review every item on the test that the consortium is going to give. So if you don't have federal influence in your testing and then therefore in your curriculum, think again, because it is already being done. The federal government has already set up a review panel to look at every test item and look at the structure of the test item, the content, and to say whether they deem that this is an appropriate test question. So it's out there. All you have to do is go to the government websites and look. All you have to do is go and listen to videos of Arne Duncan, Louis Gerstner, or any of these other major players in the Common Core movement, or you listen to David Coleman. One of the most disturbing things that I've heard is a video that David Coleman, who is now the national president of the College Board, David Coleman basically has a video that I watched just a couple of nights ago that says, with all this data that we're going to collect from your children and your families, we have the ability to change the world. So what their intent is to, and he basically said we're going to have the same data geniuses and messengers to create messaging and work with this data to basically build what the tech companies are looking at as an economic stimulus package for educational marketers through your children's data. But if you listen closely to David Coleman in his video, you will tell that he is absolutely giddy about the potential of having this data all collected in one spot for certain political operatives to be able to use that data to, I believe, direct policy. I think that's their ultimate goal. The evidence is out there. I think with the evidence that you can find, you could probably try this case and prove it in a court of law of what the intent of the federal government is. So it's happened very, very fast. Like I said, we've been distracted first by a presidential election, then by Obamacare, and now by the government shutdown. But it was done very similar to healthcare. We had to sign on to it in 2010. But the full rollout is not happening until this year, and then the testing next year. So we've gotten this far down the road, and critics are saying, well, we're too far in it. Why did you wait till now to question it? Well, guess what? Whenever you post something on a website and you only have less than 50 people that you bring in as potential review committee for Race to the Top grant, and the standards were released on June 2nd, and the state board adopted the standards, voted to begin the APA process on June 25th. That's 3 weeks and 2 days. I hardly believe that is ample time for any parent or school district or anybody else to vet what we're signing on to. That's something that's so significant and has the potential to have such a great impact on everyday lives. And it's absolutely evident that no consideration was given to the local state education agencies in how they would pay for, how they would logistically handle this, because the standards writers knew that there would not be ample curriculum out there, that they would be struggling to find curriculum, and like you said, they're writing the curriculum as they go. So this was done to try to get the money without having any type of consideration for what kind of hardships it was going to place on the folks in the local school districts to be able to implement this and to do a good job. And you know, what we continually do is we continually make the job of educating our children harder and harder based on what some bureaucrat says is going to be the next best thing to slice bread, and it's going to cure all our problems. And you have seen the business community engage in Common Core and come in and say we're supportive of this, because they have been sold that this is a workforce development program that's going to give you better skilled applicants for jobs. Okay, that's kind of what their take is on it, is, you know, whether we have any valid data out there that says this is going to do anything positive. The business community, along with the Gates Foundation and some of the others, have said, well, you know, we need to try this. And Bill Gates has gone on record as saying it'll be a decade down the road before we really know if we've done anything positive. So, you know, but he's put all the money out there, and he's put grants in the hands of every potential educational stakeholder on the planet, including the state of Mississippi he's given a check to make sure that this continues to roll out. And quite honestly, when the states begin to really sink in and the folks realize what was going on, because this never went through the legislature. Nobody ever voted on it in the legislature. The ones who were there before me, they didn't hear about it. Unless they went and read a little portion on the State Department of Education's website or on the Secretary of State's website, they had no idea. There was less than 50 people that were brought in from various walks of life in the state of Mississippi to kind of serve as a rubber stamp committee to be a Race to the Top advisory committee. So it happened fast, and we're only now beginning to find out exactly what it amounts to, and we're only now just beginning to find out what the intent of those who created this movement, this initiative, truly have in mind for the federal education. Arne Duncan has come out and said, and in this Strengthen America Schools Act that just passed the Senate Education Committee, they basically say we will have a greater shared responsibility. Okay? I don't like those words. The Constitution says education should be local, should be left up to the states. But when you have a bill passed through the Senate Education Committee in Washington, D.C. that basically gives way, way more control than a state, than a federal government education chief should have over education, the radar better go up. And the way Arne Duncan proposes to continue to get this control is through grants to the schools. And everybody wants a grant, okay? Arnie Duncan has also said that he wants to totally restructure the way schools operate in the community. He wants what's called 21st century community-based schools. There are already grants in this state, in neighboring counties, to extend the school hours, to keep children in school for 12 hours a day. $875 million grant over 4 years to a neighboring county. The federal government is $16.8 trillion in debt. Yet, we can't give teachers the amount of money that they really deserve to do a good job in the classrooms, because all the money is going toward an agenda. It never makes it to the classroom. There's always money to be found for somebody's agenda or somebody's program, but we never get to what makes other countries have exceptional education programs, and that is they elevate the status of the teacher in society and in the culture. In this new program, in this Common Core initiative, and in the MSTAR teacher evaluation system, teachers are no longer called teachers. If you read through all the paperwork, teachers are now facilitators of learning. Okay? So, we're facilitators of an initiative that's been developed by an outside group. If that doesn't sound like we have less control, I don't know what does. We have Louis Gerstner and Arnie Duncan saying that we need more federal control. Louis Gerstner's gone so far, and Mark Tucker's gone so far as saying we don't need any more local boards of education. We want to totally abolish them, make them service organizations only. So the very people who have gotten on board with Common Core and done the best that they can to implement this and have tried to promote it and stay positive about it, and I totally understand that, because that's their job and that's their livelihood. And nobody wants to do a job that they don't like what they're doing. But these are the very people who stand to lose the most, along with the students and parents, from the vision that these folks in the Federal Department of Education have, are the local school superintendents and the local school boards. Because inch by inch and check by check, the control is moving to Washington, D.C. We have to decide whether in Mississippi we want to contact our legislators and say that we need to halt this Common Core thing pending a further evaluation, cost analysis, standards comparison. We have conflicting standards comparisons already from Mississippi's current set of standards. The Fordham Institute, who's been paid by the Gates Foundation to do curriculum alignment or do standards alignment studies for every state in the union, they have said that Mississippi's math standards are really not too bad. Said they have good STEM content. They need to be have a little more clarity here and there, but overall they're pretty good. We'll give them a C. The Fordham said that Mississippi's language arts standards are so bad they're not even on the scale. They're among the worst in the country. But yet the group that Mississippi Department of Education contracted to do our alignment to Common Core, SCDL's Comprehensive Center out of Georgia, they say the exact opposite of what the Fordham Institute says. SCDL says that Mississippi's math is so horrible that it's not on the scale, but that Mississippi's language arts are of similar rigor and content of Common Core, and there won't be a whole lot of work to get our standards in line with Common Core. And I posed that question to the State Superintendent of Education. The Senate Conservative Coalition posed that question to explain the conflicting alignment study. And really we didn't get a satisfactory answer, but what we did get from the questions was, these standards are just goals, and how they're implemented in the classroom is really what matters. And that goes back to a study from the Brookings Institution at Brown University. Through the years, every time a new set of standards has been implemented in the states, the tests that they're teaching year from year, they might go up a little bit because they're learning more about how to teach the tests. But on overall scale, every time we have set a new set of standards or upgraded standards, ACTs have basically been flat in Mississippi for 20 years. So they've never really got to the core of what goes on in a classroom. So the whole idea that Common Core is going to be a panacea or a cure-all for everything that ails education is basically invalidated by the own words of the state superintendent. So I'm here because parents asked me to be here. Parents called me and said, will you come do an informational meeting? And I said, anywhere that a parent wants to look at this and look at the facts and not subjective innuendo, and basically look at where this came from and look at the evidence of where it's possibly going, then I will come and share with them. So my concern is we're going to lose control eventually. And nobody in Washington, D.C. or in any trade organization that's been propped up or paid off by Bill Gates knows what